I still remember the exact way it happened, though I've replayed it 100 times in my head like some broken record. I was at the corner bookstore that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, leaning over the counter while trying to make sense of a stack of returned novels. The bell over the door jingled once, and that's when she walked in, like she belonged to another, quieter world, the one where people carry themselves with ease and don't apologize for taking up space. Her name is Eleanor, though I never said it aloud that day. She was in her mid-40s, but it wasn't the age itself. It was the confidence, the quiet authority in the tilt of her chin and the way her fingers brushed against the shelves as if she could read the stories just by touch. She wore a wool coat, one that looked soft enough to get lost in, and her hair caught the light in a way that made me briefly forget how to breathe. I was fumbling with a return slip when she leaned over the counter, her hand brushing mine as she reached for a book. It was an accident, or so I told myself, but the jolt that ran through me said otherwise. She looked up, caught my gaze, and her lips curved into that faint, almost imperceptible smile. "This feels familiar, doesn't it?" she said softly. The words hovered between us, more of a question and less of an answer, but they left me stunned. I wanted to answer. I wanted to say, I don't know, but maybe yes, but I only managed a throat-clearing cough and a distracted shuffle of the books. Eleanor didn't press. She just lingered, her eyes watching mine for a beat too long before she turned and wandered toward the poetry section. Her presence stayed, though, like a faint perfume that refuses to leave the room. I found myself stealing glances, noting the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the slight crease in her brow as she scanned the spines, the casual grace of someone who moves through the world as though the world itself is part of the scenery. And then, the most ridiculous thing happened. She reached for a volume I had just set aside, and, for a moment, our fingers brushed again. Just that small, fleeting contact, and my heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself it was nothing. Just a bookstore, just an older woman, just an awkward hand brush. But the truth was, there was something in her eyes, something that made it hard to focus on anything else. She didn't laugh, didn't make a joke, didn't linger to look down on me or measure me up. She simply existed, and in that existence, she made the entire world seem quieter, sharper, somehow heavier with possibility. By the time she left, I had returned the books and counted the seconds until the bell jingled again, half hoping she would come back, half hoping she wouldn't. I walked out after her, telling myself it was just coincidence, just the way the light had hit her coat. But even as I left the store and the ordinary hum of the street swallowed her image, I couldn't stop thinking about that touch, that brief spark. And maybe the strangest part was the memory of her words, hovering in the corner of my mind. "This feels familiar, doesn't it?" I didn't know then what it meant. I still don't. But I can't stop thinking about it. I didn't expect to see Eleanor again so soon. The cafe had that same faint hum of espresso machines and quiet chatter, the kind of place where time slows just enough for things you don't understand to sneak up on you. I was stacking chairs near the window when she appeared, her coat draped over one arm, a notebook tucked under the other. She nodded at me, brief, polite, measured, nothing more. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice lodged somewhere behind my teeth. Instead, I carried on with my task, careful not to make it obvious I was watching her. She slid into the corner seat and pulled out her laptop, her fingers moving across the keys in a rhythm that was precise but not rushed. I noticed the way her shoulders tensed every time someone brushed past her table, like she was bracing against something invisible. There was a kind of elegance in it, but also a hint of exhaustion. When a chair tipped awkwardly near her table, I rushed over. "Here, let me." I began, and she looked up, her gaze softening, but only for a fraction of a second. She exhaled quietly and said, "Thanks," barely louder than a whisper. Her hands brushed mine as she adjusted the chair, and for a heartbeat, I could feel the warmth, the faint tremor in her fingers. I lingered for no reason, observing her more closely than I should have. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear repeatedly, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the almost imperceptible sigh she let out when she thought no one was looking. She was composed, confident, but I could see the weariness underneath, the cracks in the armor she didn't let anyone touch. I tried not to stare, but my attention kept returning to her hands. Strong, capable hands that held a pen like a conductor's baton, yet just a moment ago had hesitated against mine, unsure if the contact was allowed. There was a vulnerability there, fleeting and delicate, but it made my chest tighten. "You're back earlier than usual," I said, almost to fill the silence, but she didn't answer directly. She only gave a small shrug, eyes flicking toward the window, then back to her screen. The words weren't necessary. The pause said more than she could say out loud. I wondered what she was hiding, what battles she fought quietly while the world moved on around her. And somehow, even in that guarded stillness, there was a gravity I couldn't resist. She laughed softly at something on her screen, a low, melodic sound that made the cafe seem too small, too bright. I felt my throat tighten, and I realized I was aware of every breath she took. The tension between us didn't need words. I helped her with the chair, lingered with the coffee she hadn't asked me to fetch, and when our hands brushed again, this time on purpose, I noticed how she didn't pull away immediately. Not yet. She looked up at me, eyes hesitant, lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, but didn't know if she could. And I knew, even in that quiet, ordinary moment, that something unspoken had begun to pull us closer. Something forbidden, fragile, and dangerous in its simplicity. The rain started softly at first, a whisper against the windows of the repair shop, then grew into a steady patter that made the world outside feel distant. Eleanor and I were the only ones left, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly, illuminating the scattered tools and half-fixed engines. I was wiping grease from my hands, trying not to look at her as she crouched beside the engine she'd been inspecting, but somehow my gaze kept drifting. She glanced up, catching me just as my hand lingered a second too long on the wrench. "You're quiet tonight," she said, voice casual but softer than usual. "I'm thinking," I muttered, unsure what I was thinking exactly, but knowing it had something to do with her. She tilted her head, as if weighing whether to press, and then turned her attention back to the engine. The closeness was maddening. My knee brushed hers as I moved to the other side, and she didn't flinch. I felt the electricity in that brief contact like static. My chest tightened, a warning bell I couldn't ignore. I wanted to reach for her hand, to say the words that hovered on the edge of my mind, but I couldn't. Something told me it would ruin what little composure she still carried. A notification pinged from her phone. She frowned, checked it, and I saw the brief flash of an ex's name across the screen. Her fingers trembled slightly, and I resisted the urge to reach out, to steady her hand. It wasn't mine to steady. We worked in silence for a while after that. Each noise, the drip of rain, the clink of metal, magnified. I could hear her quiet breath, the subtle brush of her jacket as she shifted. I wanted to speak, to admit that I thought about her constantly, that her presence felt like both a tether and a storm inside me. But the words got stuck, lodged somewhere in my throat. At one point, I needed a tool she had just set down. Our fingers brushed again, this time longer, tentative, like both of us were testing the boundaries without realizing it. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain she could hear it. She looked up, and for a second, her eyes were vulnerable, open in a way she never allowed anyone to see. I wanted to say something, anything, but the phone pinged again, pulling her attention. The moment dissolved. We both froze, aware of the space we'd almost crossed. My hand itched to linger, hers almost did, and yet we retreated, each wordless motion full of hesitation. I wondered if she felt the same storm I did, if she noticed how close we had come to something. As the rain drummed harder on the roof, I caught her glance from the corner of my eye. It was brief, charged, and impossible to read completely, but the unspoken tension hummed in the air like a live wire. I stepped back to give her room, my chest tight, my mind spinning, but my hand couldn't resist brushing against hers once more as I passed. She didn't pull away immediately, not yet. Not yet. The cafe was nearly empty that evening, the low hum of the heater and the soft clink of spoons against mugs filling the spaces between us. Eleanor and I sat across from each other, neither of us moving much, both of us nursing warm drinks that had gone slightly cold. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with something, anything, but the words lodged somewhere inside me, heavy and jagged. She stirred her coffee slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. The tremor in her hands betrayed the calm she wore like armor. I could see it, the exhaustion, the vigilance, the way she carried herself as if the world might crumble the moment she let go. Finally, she spoke. "What are we doing?" Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, yet it cut through the silence like a shard. She didn't look at me directly. Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond, on the window, on the rain streaking the glass. I swallowed. I don't know, I admitted. The words felt insufficient, clumsy, but they were the truth. I couldn't lie. Not to her. Not here, not now. Her lips pressed together, then parted, then she sighed, leaning back slightly in her chair. "It feels strange. And maybe it shouldn't. But it does. And I can't stop thinking about it," she said, finally meeting my gaze for a heartbeat. Her eyes were so open, so unguarded, it was terrifying. I wanted to reach across the table, to brush a strand of hair from her face, to say me too, but I stayed still. The words caught in my throat, lodged in the space between us like a living thing. Instead, I just watched, the curve of her jaw, the flicker in her eyes, the way her hand hovered near mine, and then pulled back almost imperceptibly. We sat in silence again, longer this time. Not because we didn't have things to say, but because speaking felt like crossing a line neither of us fully understood. Every glance, every pause, every shallow breath became louder than any words we could force out. "I can't pretend this is normal," she whispered finally, so quiet I barely caught it. Her voice shook ever so slightly, and I could see the conflict etched in her expression. The confidence I'd admired in her before was still there, but now it was layered with something fragile, human, something that demanded attention. I nodded, though she couldn't see, because I understood. There was no easy resolution here. No neat ending, no comfortable compartment to hide our feelings in. We were teetering on the edge of something undefined, something that made every ordinary gesture, every brush of the hand, every look, feel like fire. She picked at her sleeve, a subtle, restless motion that betrayed her inner turmoil. I wanted to speak, to reassure her, to name what I was feeling, but what I felt didn't have a name yet. And even if it did, would I dare voice it? Her voice came again, fragile and small, barely more than a breath. Maybe I shouldn't even be here." And just like that, the weight of her words landed in my chest. The air between us thickened, carrying all the things we couldn't say. And I realized, with a sudden, devastating clarity, that even being near her was both a privilege and a wound. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I only watched, helpless, as the fragile line she had drawn trembled, and we both knew the quiet was more honest than anything else we could ever say. I didn't expect her to start talking about him. The cafe was quiet again, early afternoon this time, sunlight streaking lazily through the blinds, painting stripes across her face. Eleanor stirred her tea slowly, the steam curling upward like it was trying to carry her words away before they landed. I lost someone once," she said, almost to herself. Her fingers traced a delicate circle on the rim of her cup. "Not recently. Years ago. But sometimes, I still feel like I'm walking through the days carrying pieces of them." I stayed still, careful not to interrupt, though my chest tightened. There was a fragility in her voice I hadn't heard before, and for the first time, the confident, unshakable woman I knew seemed human, so achingly human. "I never told anyone that," she added, eyes fixed on the table. "Maybe I shouldn't even be telling you now." "You can't," I said softly, almost without thinking. "You can tell me anything." She lifted her gaze, and the faintest tremor passed through her hands. He used to leave notes for me. Little things, on my desk, in books I'd leave on the shelf. I never kept them all, but some I did. I still have one. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Her hands shook slightly as she handed it to me. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, full of memories I wasn't supposed to see. My chest tightened as I read, realizing it wasn't just a note. It was a piece of someone she had loved and lost, a piece of her I hadn't known existed. I looked up, and she was watching me, waiting, unsure. It reminds me that time doesn't heal in straight lines, she whispered. Some things just echo. I wanted to tell her that she wasn't alone, that echoes could be shared, that maybe she didn't have to carry all that weight herself. But the words felt too large, too clumsy. Instead, I just nodded, letting the silence stretch, letting her presence and her heartbreak exist in the same spacco with me. Her eyes flicked briefly toward mine, a faint, almost guilty smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I didn't mean to, she began, then stopped, swallowing the words. You didn't, I said gently. It's okay. And it was. Or at least, it would have been, if the gravity of her confession hadn't rooted me to the spot, made me acutely aware of every brush of her sleeve, every tilt of her head, every quiet inhale she took. For a moment, nothing moved. The hum of the café, the sunlight across her face, the delicate tremor in her hands. It all felt like a revelation. Not explosive, not cinematic, just unbearably human. I realized then how much I wanted to be there, fully, for this side of her, for the parts no one else saw. She reached for the cup again, her fingers brushing mine lightly. That small, unassuming touch, the brush of skin against skin, made my heart skip in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. It was quiet. But it shifted something in both of us, subtly, irreversibly, leaving me breathless in a way that I couldn't name. The repair shop smelled of oil and rain, the evening light fading to that muted gray that makes everything feel softer. Eleanor and I had been working quietly, side by side, neither of us speaking more than necessary. The tension that had built between us over weeks, months, maybe, was finally settling into something different, something almost gentle. I noticed her shoulders had relaxed, just a little, and the crease between her brows had softened. She reached for a wrench at the same moment I did, and our hands met. This time, there was no spark of hesitation, no quick recoil, just a slow, deliberate brush, as if we had both been waiting for permission to simply exist near each other. I'm glad you're here, she said softly, almost to herself. Her voice didn't carry the weight of fear or doubt this time, just acknowledgement, simple and honest. I nodded, unable to find words that felt enough. Instead, I simply stayed close, noticing the small things, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the faint smell of her perfume, the quiet rhythm of her breathing as she worked. I wanted to say everything, to lay bare the weeks of watching, thinking, longing, but I didn't need to. We didn't need words for what was already understood. At one point, she paused, leaning against the workbench. I followed her motion, just enough to be near, and we stood there, the silence stretching comfortably around us. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand explanation, that allowed us both to breathe in the space we'd carved out together. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against mine again, lingering just long enough for me to feel the warmth. I let my fingers tighten gently around hers. Not possession, not declaration, just presence. It was a quiet acknowledgement. We are here, and we are together, even if it's only like this for now. She looked up at me then, eyes soft, unguarded, and there was a flicker of understanding, of relief, of permission. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The connection that had been simmering, taut with hesitation and longing, settled finally into something earned, something inevitable. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I rested a forehead lightly against hers, a tiny gesture that felt monumental in its simplicity. The rain outside had softened to a whisper, the fading light casting shadows that danced along the walls. In that quiet, mundane space, everything else, the past, the rules, the distance between us, fell away. And when she let her hand remain in mine, unpulled, unmoving, I realized it was enough. Not a promise, not a declaration, just the shared truth of two flawed people who had found a fragile equilibrium. The moment stretched, unhurried, almost fragile, and yet it was final. Not in a dramatic flourish, but in the quiet understanding that whatever came next, we had reached this point together, fully, and nothing needed to be rushed. That I think about that evening often. Not the grand gestures, not the thunderous confessions, but the quiet, fragile moments that made everything else irrelevant. Eleanor and I, sitting in the repair shop, hands brushing, foreheads leaning together, neither of us needing to say more than the space between us allowed. I've changed since then. I notice things now, small gestures, unspoken tensions, the way someone's presence can shift the shape of a room. I've learned that connection isn't always loud, that love doesn't have to announce itself with fireworks to be real. It can live in the pauses, the quiet understanding, the gentle persistence of being there for someone even when nothing is said. Eleanor has changed, too. I can see it in the way she moves through her days, lighter somehow, though still capable, still confident. She carries fewer ghosts, or at least, she's learned to share them with someone who doesn't judge, someone who watches, listens, and simply exists with her in the moments that matter. I like to think she's found a little more freedom in the way she smiles now, a freedom that wasn't possible before we met. Our dynamic shifted the moment we acknowledged it. Not with grand statements, not with promises we couldn't keep, but with subtle gestures, a shared presence that made silence feel full instead of empty. That's what stayed with me. The way trust can grow without words, how longing can evolve into quiet comfort, how two people can find a rhythm that fits even when the world outside doesn't. I remember the way her hand fit in mine, the almost imperceptible tremor that told me she was letting go just enough to let me in. And I realized, in that instant, that love isn't always about the declaration. It's about the surrender, the willingness to remain present, the courage to share space with someone else's vulnerabilities without trying to fix or control them. Looking back, I see now that everything we went through, the uncertainty, the hesitation, the near misses, was necessary. It taught us patience, resilience, and the quiet beauty of intimacy. There's no dramatic flourish in our story, no perfect ending, just a series of small, human choices that led us here, together, and that's enough. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about her. The tilt of her head when she's concentrating, the way she laughs softly at nothing, the warmth of her hand resting in mine. And I feel the same quiet thrill I felt the very first time our fingers brushed. It's a reminder that connection, real connection, never really leaves you. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?